I've been sitting on this story for years, mostly because it makes me look exactly like the kind of person I pretend not to be. But this feels like the right place to finally say it out loud. I didn't rob anyone. I didn't pull a gun. I didn't even technically break into anything. All I did was talk. One anonymous tip. That's it. And it completely derailed a multi-million-dollar business deal for a competitor, and quietly boosted my own career in ways I'm still benefiting from. At the time, I was working mid-level at a logistics and procurement firm. Nothing glamorous, but ambitious, fast-growing, and aggressively competitive. We specialized in long-term supply contracts with manufacturers. The kind of contracts that lock in revenue for 5 to 10 years. The kind people build careers on. There was one deal in particular everyone knew about. A massive contract between a manufacturing conglomerate and one of our biggest competitors. If they landed it, they'd dominate a whole region. If they didn't, the door cracked open for us. I wasn't in upper management. I wasn't in the room where big decisions happened. I was a background character, analyst, spreadsheet guy, coffee refiller during late nights. But I had one advantage. I had ears. I overheard things in elevators. I sat near conference rooms. I reviewed documents that weren't meant to be interesting, but sometimes were. And one afternoon, by accident, I learned something that felt radioactive. The competitor's proposal relied heavily on a subcontractor whose financials were optimistic. Not fraudulent. Not fake. Just stretched. Debts hidden in footnotes. A pending lawsuit in another state. A revolving door CFO situation that screamed instability. Nothing illegal about using them. But plenty questionable if a cautious legal team took a closer look. At first, I did what most people do with dangerous information. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Then I watched my manager get passed over for promotion. Then I watched a senior director openly talk about how this deal, once lost, might trigger layoffs. Then I saw a company-wide email about cost control measures. That's when the thought first formed. What if they never signed that contract? Not because we beat them. Not because we outbid them. But because someone gets scared. I didn't think of it as sabotage at first. I framed it in my head as balancing the scales. I wasn't falsifying anything. I wasn't inventing lies. I would just point someone in the right direction. I told myself a lot of comforting things that week. Mostly, I told myself I was protecting my future. And maybe, in a warped way, my coworkers' futures too. That justification felt warm, convincing, and dangerously easy. What I didn't know then was how small the action would feel, and how big the consequences would become. Once the idea lodged itself in my head, it didn't leave. It followed me home. It sat next to me while I microwaved dinner. It crawled into bed with me and stared at the ceiling. I kept telling myself I wasn't that kind of person. I paid my taxes. I returned shopping carts. I held doors open. But I also had student loans that felt endless. Rent that went up every year. A resume that looked solid, but not impressive. I knew how this company worked. People who made waves moved up. People who stayed quiet stayed put. What scared me most wasn't the morality. It was how easy it would be. The information already existed. Public records. Court filings. Financial disclosures buried inside attachments no one read. All I had to do was connect dots for someone whose job it was to panic about risk. I spent 3 nights researching the subcontractor like I was writing a term paper. Corporate registry databases. Old press releases. Legal dockets. LinkedIn job histories of former executives. The more I dug, the worse it looked. Not criminal. Just shaky. Perfectly shaky. I started a private document. No company laptop. No work Wi-Fi. No saved passwords. I copied links. Screenshots. Dates. Page numbers. I wasn't building a lie. I was building a trail. And that distinction became my emotional life raft. Because in my head, liars are villains. Messengers are just messengers. By the fourth night, I had everything laid out cleanly, neatly, professionally. If someone received it, they'd take it seriously. That's when I realized I wasn't thinking anymore. I was planning. And that realization should have scared me. It didn't. It felt calm. Like I'd finally chosen a direction. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'd decide. Tomorrow never came. Because I already had. The next step wasn't sending anything. It was figuring out how not to be me. I couldn't use my phone. Couldn't use my laptop. Couldn't use my apartment Wi-Fi. Couldn't even risk doing it from work under some anonymous browser mode fantasy. I'd seen enough IT audits to know how easily anonymous collapses. So I started thinking like someone who didn't exist. I went to a big box electronics store after work and bought the cheapest prepaid smartphone they had. Cash. No rewards number. No email receipt. I told the cashier I was buying it for my kid. I don't have a kid. I didn't turn it on at home. I walked 3 blocks away to a coffee shop I'd never been to before. I sat in the far corner near the bathroom, ordered a small coffee, and powered it up. No personal accounts. No syncing. No contacts. I created a brand new email address with a generic name that screamed burner. Something like industry.watchdog17 at whatever. I practiced typing messages in the Notes app. Short. Neutral. Professional. No emotion. No opinion. No. I think. Only. You may want to review. I read everything aloud, listening for tone. I wasn't pretending to be a hero. I wasn't pretending to be a villain. I was pretending to be boring. Boring felt safe. By the time I left, the coffee was cold and my hands smelled like cheap plastic from the phone casing. I didn't send anything yet. But I had created the mouth. Soon I would decide what it said. I spent more time figuring out who to send it to than I did writing the actual message. Sending it to the competitor directly made no sense. They'd ignore it, or worse, trace it. Sending it to our own company felt dangerous. Internal investigations have a way of circling back. So I focused on the real gatekeepers. The manufacturer's legal and compliance department. Big corporations live in fear of 3 things: lawsuits, regulators, and headlines. I didn't need to convince them the subcontractor was guilty of anything. I only needed to convince them it was worth a closer look. I dug through press releases until I found names. General Counsel. Deputy Compliance Officer. Risk Assessment Director. Their email formats were easy to crack. First initial, last name, corporate domain. I tested none of them. I didn't want digital footprints bouncing off servers. Instead, I picked one person. Mid-level compliance manager. High enough to matter. Low enough to panic and escalate. I imagined their morning. Coffee. Inbox. Calendar full. Then my email lands. Not dramatic. Not threatening. Just inconvenient. That's when I realized something ugly about myself. I wasn't just trying to stop a deal. I was trying to inject doubt into a stranger's day. I told myself again that I was just sharing public information. But deep down, I knew better. I was aiming a pebble at an avalanche. And I was about to let go. I wrote the email at the same coffee shop, 2 days after buying the phone. Same corner. Same cheap coffee. Different weight in my chest. The message itself was only 6 sentences. No greeting. No signature. No backstory. Just, you may want to review the financial stability and litigation exposure of subcontractor name prior to finalizing any agreements involving their participation in the project name. Then bullet points. Pending civil suit filed in state, docket number included. Rapid executive turnover within past 18 months. Debt obligations disclosed in 20XX filing exceeding reported cash flow. Prior contract termination referenced in industry publication. Every bullet had a link or citation. No opinions. No accusations. Nothing emotional. I read it 10 times. I wanted it to feel like it came from someone tired. Someone who had seen this before. Someone who didn't care what happened next. My finger hovered over send longer than I expected. Not because I was thinking about the competitor. Not because I was thinking about legality. I was thinking about the version of myself that existed 5 minutes ago. Because once I clicked that button, he wouldn't exist anymore. I took a breath. Exhaled slowly. And pressed send. Nothing exploded. No alarms. No dramatic music. Just a tiny whoosh. And then a blank sent folder. I stared at the screen. It felt anticlimactic. I paid for my coffee. Walked out. And started pretending nothing had happened. The worst part wasn't fear. It was silence. No reply. No bounce back. No sign anyone had even opened it. For the first day, I checked the burner phone constantly, even though I knew I wouldn't get a response. I told myself compliance people don't thank anonymous tipsters. They investigate quietly. Still, every vibration from my real phone made my stomach jump. At work, everything looked exactly the same. People complained about the coffee. Someone microwaved fish. My manager stressed about timelines. Meanwhile, I felt like I was carrying a live wire in my chest. I started scanning emails for clues. Any mention of delays. Any sudden meetings. Any whispers. Nothing. By day 3, I started convincing myself it hadn't worked. Maybe they deleted it. Maybe it went to spam. Maybe the compliance manager skimmed it, shrugged, and moved on. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt disappointed. That realization scared me more than anything. Because disappointment meant I had wanted something bad to happen. I had wanted damage. I caught myself daydreaming about the manufacturer's legal team pulling files, asking questions, pausing negotiations. I hated myself for imagining it. I also couldn't stop. The waiting wasn't passive. It was active torture. Every hour stretched. Every day felt longer. And then, a week later, something small happened. Too small for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. The competitor pushed their expected close date back by 2 weeks. No explanation. Just a quiet calendar change. My heart started pounding. The pebble had landed. At first, I told myself delays happen all the time. Legal reviews. Scheduling conflicts. Someone on vacation. Normal stuff. But once I'd seen the new date, I couldn't unsee it. I started paying closer attention to everything related to that deal. Who was suddenly busy? Who looked tired? Which meetings ran long behind closed doors? I noticed one of our directors come out of a call looking irritated but hopeful. Not excited. Not relaxed. Hopeful. That's a very specific expression. A week after the delay, another shift happened. The manufacturer requested updated risk documentation from the competitor. That phrase made its way through the rumor mill. People said it casually, like it was routine. It wasn't. Updated risk documentation means someone, somewhere, raised a flag. I felt a weird cocktail of emotions. Triumph first. Then nausea. Then a kind of hollow buzzing in my ears. I hadn't exaggerated anything. I hadn't lied. But I had engineered this moment. I had nudged a massive machine and now gears were turning. At home, I started sleeping badly. Not nightmares. Just shallow sleep. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my jaw clenched and my heart racing. I stopped using the burner phone entirely. Turned it off. Shoved it in a drawer. As if distance could undo cause and effect. I kept waiting for the universe to tap me on the shoulder and say, "We know." Nothing happened. Which somehow made it worse. Because it meant it was working. Once the machine started moving, It didn't move fast. It crept. Slow enough that no single moment looked dramatic. Fast enough that the direction was obvious. Another week passed. Then another. The competitor's sales team started making more visits to the manufacturer's offices. Not celebratory visits. Damage control visits. You could tell by the body language when they showed up in our building later for unrelated meetings. Shoulders tight. Smiles stretched too thin. Meanwhile, our leadership quietly became attentive. Suddenly, people who never spoke to me before were asking for updated projections. Scenario models. What-if spreadsheets. Nobody explained why. They didn't need to. I was watching two realities run in parallel. Publicly, business as usual. Privately, a slow-motion stumble. The strangest part was how invisible my role felt. No one looked at me differently. No one suspected. I was still the quiet analyst. Still refilling coffee. Still nodding in meetings. Inside, I felt like I was standing behind a curtain, watching a play I had secretly rewritten. Sometimes I felt powerful. Sometimes I felt sick. Sometimes I felt both at once. One afternoon, I overheard someone say, "They're nervous about that subcontractor." Just that. No details. No drama. But it landed in my chest like a dropped plate. They weren't nervous by accident. They were nervous because I made them nervous. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I stared at my shoes and tried to slow my breathing. This was no longer hypothetical. It was happening. And I didn't know how to stop it. Up until this point, everything felt abstract. Companies. Departments. Contracts. Faceless entities. Then I saw Mark. Mark worked at the competitor. We weren't close, but we met at industry mixers, exchanged cards, joked about bad conference coffee. He was one of those relentlessly upbeat sales guys who somehow made it work without being obnoxious. I ran into him at a networking event about a month after the first delay. He looked tired. Not long week, tired. Deep tired. We did the usual small talk. Weather. Traffic. How's business? He hesitated before answering. Honestly? Kind of a mess right now. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Big deal might fall apart. Legal spooked about one of our partners. Whole thing's under review. There it was. Spoken out loud. By a real person with a mortgage and a career and probably a family. I nodded sympathetically. Said something useless like, "Yeah, deals get weird sometimes." Inside, my stomach was collapsing in on itself. This wasn't a chessboard. This wasn't strategy. This was people. People whose stress I had personally injected into their lives. I went home and poured a drink even though it was a Tuesday. I told myself again. I didn't lie. I didn't fabricate. I just pointed. But pointing a gun and pulling a trigger are different actions too. Both still kill. That analogy stuck with me. I didn't sleep at all that night. The deal didn't die in a dramatic explosion. It withered. First came extended due diligence. Then revised risk assessment. Then pending internal approvals. Each phrase sounded harmless. Together, they formed a slow strangulation. 3 months after my email, the manufacturer officially paused negotiations. That word traveled fast. Paused is corporate code for, we don't want to say no yet, but we're backing away. The competitor's stock dipped slightly the next day. Not a crash. Just a bruise. Inside our company, the mood shifted. Leadership started talking about opportunities. Our sales team was suddenly authorized to re-engage. Meetings multiplied. I sat in a conference room watching a slide deck about how we could fill the gap. No one mentioned the competitor by name. Everyone knew who they meant. The most surreal moment came when my manager pulled me aside. He thanked me for my excellent analytical support over the past quarter. Said leadership had noticed Said there might be growth opportunities for me soon. I nodded, smiled, said thanks. Inside, I felt like a fraud wearing someone else's face. The contract wasn't ours yet, but the door was wide open, and I knew, with sick certainty, that I had been the one to unlatch it. I went to the bathroom afterward and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like a criminal. That bothered me. The first real wave of fear didn't hit until I thought I was safe. That's usually how it works. One Tuesday afternoon, an email went out company-wide announcing an internal review of information security practices. Totally normal. Routine audit. Happened every year. Except this time, there was an extra paragraph about external communications and data leakage. My mouth went dry. I spent the rest of the day replaying every step I had taken. The research. The copying. The burner phone. The coffee shop. The email. I couldn't remember small details anymore, and that terrified me. Had I logged into the burner email on my home Wi-Fi by mistake? Had I copied something onto my work laptop? Had I searched a docket number while logged into the company network? Memory becomes unreliable when fear gets involved. 2 days later, IT sent a calendar invite. Mandatory security refresher training. All staff. I stared at the subject line for a full minute. In the training session, the presenter casually mentioned that outbound traffic logs are retained for extended periods. Years, in some cases. My heartbeat was so loud I was convinced the people next to me could hear it. No one looked at me. No one asked questions. No one singled me out. But for the first time since pressing send, I truly believed I might lose everything. Not because I was guilty, but because I had left a shadow. And shadows eventually get noticed. About a month after the security training, my manager asked if I had a few minutes to talk. Those words used to mean nothing. Now they felt radioactive. I followed him into a small conference room, mentally preparing a confession I would never actually give. Instead, he smiled. Told me leadership had been impressed with my recent work. Said a new senior analyst position had opened. Asked if I'd be interested. I remember nodding before my brain caught up. Yeah. Of course. He slid a printed sheet across the table. Salary increase. Bonus eligibility. Better title. It was everything I'd quietly wanted for years. I should have felt proud. I felt contaminated. We shook hands. He congratulated me. I thanked him. We both pretended this was normal. Walking back to my desk, I kept thinking. If they knew. If they knew why this was happening. Would they still be smiling? Would they still want to touch my hand? That night, I opened the drawer where I'd hidden the burner phone. Held it for a long time. Considered smashing it. Throwing it away. I didn't. Destroying it felt like admitting something to myself I wasn't ready to admit. Instead, I powered it on. No new messages. No replies. Just silence. The crime had no applause. No acknowledgement. Only rewards. That scared me more than punishment ever could. Time did what time always does. It smoothed the sharp edges. Not enough to erase them. Just enough to make them dull. Our company eventually won the contract. Not overnight. Not cleanly. But it happened. There were celebrations. Emails with exclamation points. A catered lunch I barely touched. People congratulated each other. People congratulated me. I said thank you. I kept my voice steady. From the outside, my life looked better than it ever had. Better paycheck. Better title. Better apartment. Inside, I carried a quiet, private weight. Nothing in my day-to-day life reminded me of the email. That was the problem. The world didn't mark the moment. No anniversary. No scar. No record. Just me and a memory. Sometimes I'd catch a headline about the competitor laying off staff. Nothing dramatic. Small percentage. Restructuring. I never looked for names. I didn't want to know. At night, my brain liked to replay tiny details. The coffee cup. The send button. Mark's tired face. I wasn't haunted in a cinematic way. No screaming guilt. Just a persistent awareness. I had learned I was capable of doing something quietly harmful. And nothing had stopped me. That knowledge doesn't fade. It settles. The biggest change wasn't external. It was internal. Before this, I thought there was a clear line between people who do bad things and people like me. Now I know that line is imaginary. Or maybe it exists, but it's a lot closer to everyone than we want to admit. I didn't wake up planning to sabotage anyone. I didn't have a villain speech. I had stress. I had resentment. I had ambition. And I had an opportunity that looked small enough to rationalize. That combination is more dangerous than hatred. Because it feels reasonable. Afterward, I started noticing how often I look for shortcuts in other areas of life. Not illegal ones, but ethical gray ones. Small justifications. Tiny compromises. Every time I think about that email, it's become a reference point. Not in a heroic way. In a warning way. I haven't done anything like it again. Not because I'm suddenly noble, but because I know how easy it was. I know I don't get a dramatic, evil laugh moment before crossing a line. I get a quiet, logical voice saying, "It's fine." That voice is the real threat. And I don't trust it anymore. I don't expect forgiveness. From anyone reading this. From myself. That's not really the point. The point is honesty. If you're looking for a twist where I got caught, I didn't. If you're looking for karma, I can't point to anything concrete. My life, objectively, improved. That's the uncomfortable truth. The universe did not balance the scales. Which means we can't rely on the universe to handle our conscience for us. I still work in the same industry. I still go to conferences. Sometimes I wonder if I've shaken hands with someone whose job disappeared because of a chain reaction I started. I try not to follow that thought too far. Here's what I've learned. Most serious wrongdoing doesn't feel dramatic. It feels administrative. It feels like sending an email. It feels like clicking a button. If you ever find yourself holding information that could quietly hurt someone for your own gain, pause. Not for morality speeches. Not for fear of prison. Pause because once you realize you're capable of it, you can't unknow that about yourself. And that knowledge changes you. Maybe that's the real punishment. That's mine, at least.